Chris. Thanks for coming on the show today. Please take a second to introduce yourself and tell us about the work that you do.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. I'm Chris Wolf. I am a director of learning and development, and I work at a very entrepreneurial organization, which is a lot of fun. And I typically split my time between leadership development and a lot of tech implementation. And I would say probably culture building and engagement as well is pretty much the focus of my work.
You cover a lot of areas, so
Yeah.
leadership, engagement, and culture. I'm curious, things have changed a lot with AI. Our culture outside of work is changing rapidly. What is preventing employees from being fully engaged at work?
I would say it is the volume and velocity of change and
Hmm.
disruption happening. Change inside the four walls of work and a lot of tension outside of the four walls of work. And it's a really interesting time to be alive. It's been
There
said
is.
like life has never been objectively easier, right? If you think about the past, but
If you zoom out,
also
yeah.
yeah, more people are unhappy, anxious, depressed, and it's hard. It's a lot of just mental and emotional load, I think. And then the volume and velocity of change inside the workplace is a lot for people to absorb. So it's a loaded question, but what about you? What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. Change is really hard. And um, you know, when we're not able to predict when that change is coming or where it's going, it does things to our brain, right? It sends us into a threat state. And a
Hmm.
different part of our brain takes action, and then our decisions become rapid and maybe not rational, but they're in more of a survival mode. And a lot of times this is happening below the level of consciousness for people. And so
Hmm.
it creates this cognitive dissonance where there's these feelings and then there's these duties or obligations, and they're not like matched. And it takes a lot of work cognitively, and there's a lot of emotional labor to like sift through that. And not everybody has those skills. It's actually the kind of skills that I try to bring to my coaching and culture work, because I think there's a real gap in that. Like most of us stop learning about emotions like in grade school, like, when we're fighting with a kid over stealing our toy. We don't have that opportunity to really learn emotion skills in the context of working relationships or community building at work and culture. Yeah. Um, when you bring leadership skills and leadership development skills into this kind of environment now, what is your focus on empowering leaders to navigate an unpredictable and rapidly changing environment?
Right. Well, I'll just toss in how we're thinking about it at my organization. And we are on the AI train. And so I think everybody has to be.
Yep.
So I like to think about it, and how I like to start the empowerment conversation is for people to, to challenge people with, John, I want you to think about how are you uniquely positioned to work alongside AI and add even more value. If AI can synthesize faster than you and analyze, and it has like a library of every piece of literature ever created, it already knows more, but how are you uniquely positioned? You have your human edge, your EQ, your empathy, your context of the broader landscape. And so that's like the start of the conversation. We have leaders at all levels, as it does every organization. And so we do have some specific competencies we teach to, I'll say like middle manager. And as you know, within Gallup, it's never been harder, right, to be a manager or a leader. And so we focus on some very, I would say, universal and timely competencies. I'll say like communication, which can be this huge bucket, but
Yep.
specifically with communication, we focus on teaching the framework of smart brevity. And then relationship building, we teach Frances Fry's trust triangle. If you know her, she's out of Harvard. So we try to teach these frameworks. One, so it's like repeatable and we have a common language, but I agree with you that we need to be teaching as much leadership as we do upskilling and other skill development.
Yeah, the AI disruption piece. I feel like I think it was Adam Grant said in one of his little posts that I saw, just like it's more important to be good at being a human right now than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you really nailed it. It's that empathy and that the emotion skills.
Mhm.
Shy away from emotional intelligence. I think it's an off-putting term, even though I get it. But when you think about it, the opposite of that means I have to admit that I'm not intelligent on some level,
Mhm.
and that just will, drive people away from even diving in, especially if they're not certain how they perform in that area or how they would stack up in that area. Um, but I think that emotion skills and empathy in conjunction with AI is key. Uh, and it's tough because AI has gotten to be really good at mimicking empathy. And it's hard to distinguish the motivation for that because these tools are incredibly helpful, but depending on the operating kind of principles behind it, there's also this keep you engaged. So you see a lot of affirmation and a lot of positivity and a lot less challenging or criticizing of an idea. And I think that that's going to catch up with us in a certain way, but really creates an imperative that we remain clear-eyed as human beings with those emotions and with that level of understanding in conjunction. So I think it's a really smart approach, but it's so tempting. Like, it spits out something that sounds, oh, that sounds smarter than I could be, so you do it, but then it also can create feelings of imposterism because it wasn't fully me and create a new set of problems. There's a race for AI to be able to kind of be generally intelligent, which includes kind of operating like humans would. So in my coaching and culture work, I really try to focus in on how your brain works, know some basic principles, but then specifically understand how your brain works so that you can know that something that triggers an emotional shift where you're, oh gosh, I'm now kind of operating from this space of feeling threatened on some level. A different part of my brain is forcing me to rapidly take action versus being grounded and calm and looking at a big picture because we're kicked into a threatening state without even knowing about it. And so everyone has a different level of understanding, and it's such a challenge in the workplace because a younger generation may have a lot more exposure to, emotions and have experience with people being interested in that or talking about it. Where you look at like an older generation and boomer, like they've got, and nobody ever asked them how they felt. And so there's a real discord on where's the middle or how do we work together across generations when it comes to affirming, seeing people's struggles and all of that, when you have a whole generation that nobody cared about that. They were just like perform, perform, perform. So I can see a lot of those challenges and personal accountability is a big piece. And then one thing I think in this work that doesn't really get talked about is opportunity to get it wrong before you get it right.
Mhm.
There was a wave with Angela Duckworth's growth mindset work where we are like, yes, the power of yet. I'm not good at it yet, but in practice, that vulnerability to get something wrong when it feels so high stakes, especially across gender divide, racial divide, age divide, um, you know, any kind of difference. It can be really amplified, and then people want to show the quickest way to look like they're doing the right thing without doing any of the risky work that might expose that, oh my gosh, I just said something that's hurtful to somebody and I had no idea. And we don't equip people with those skills to recover. And in my experience, when you have those skills to recover from that, apologize authentically, genuinely be curious about someone else's experience, do your work. There's a really rich access to a ton of information. Don't depend on that other person, but really do the work on your own and show you're changing, and relationships get so much stronger. I've seen people become so much closer after a huge misstep, but we're also now in culture kind of realize like you misstep once and you get canceled, or and it creates this counterproductive approach to the work that we're doing.
Right. One, I would almost tie that back to your other thought about empathy. And you were like, we think it's this mushy thing, but to your full what you just mentioned and your end point, I think it all does tie back to empathy. I do have a question for you. You said a few interesting things. One, it was that threat state. I don't think everybody knows, and until you tell it to them or tell it to me, echo it back to me. I'm not aware that I'm in this threat state, but I absolutely believe you and I can find evidence all around me. So I think we need to start just sharing what is happening and what happens in the brain. You mentioned how AI is showing up with some empathy and EQ, and I would almost go as far to say it is better at attunement than I am. I feel like my GPT knows me pretty well, and I go to it for as a coach for specific coaching conversations. You also mentioned how that can kind of pop us into or accelerate some imposter syndrome. I might almost say, additionally, I have seen it accelerate like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, oh my gosh, I'm an expert and I know this much about this topic that's this big, right? So with all that, I know you took us in a lot of directions and I piled on. I am curious how you would think about getting an organization started thinking about the neuroscience behind what's happening. One, there's so much neuroscience education that has been democratized, and it's so great we can all be learning about it, and it certainly serves us. I feel like you have gone down and dug into that area, which is so important right now. What do you think is important for organizations or maybe just leaders like me to know about the EQ, the neuroscience, the threat state? What's the first thing you would tell me to be aware of so I can lead more effectively?
Yeah, this is great. I love it. And you're right. I am thirsty for this knowledge and I go down lots of rabbit holes on this. And so I think when you talk about what corporations need, right, from a culture standpoint, it needs to be simple enough that it can be taught pretty easily, right? There needs to be data that can show, right, like is this useful or not over, and if we're starting here, how do we know that this work is effective? And there needs to be a tool that helps people reflect on their own state, but not from a punitive standpoint, right? And then develop common language and understanding. So I want to set that context, but the very first place I would start are just some basic operating principles of our human brain, right? It's like a supercomputer on top of our shoulders that we know very little about. And most people don't learn these things until they have to, whether they go through something terrible and they, maybe have to get some support where they start to realize like, okay, my lens, my view isn't what I thought, right? Our brains are always trying to find a safe spot for us, and they're trying to predict what's coming next. And if we don't realize that's what's happening, we can like really misalign the thoughts and thinking something is very true because it feels right, even though it's our brain trying to protect us from something that may not really be a threat, but feels like it. So those basic operating principles, or the algorithm of the brain, so to speak, I would start with the basics of how the brain works, and just as simply as you can, and create a common language to then build on, because here's how the brain works, but then here's how my brain works, right? And my lived experience, the culture I grew up in, whatever I might be dealing with, can change that radically. And so that a taste of that would be, right, we've got these, our brain's incredibly complex, but to kind of sift it down to the two most important parts, we have the prefrontal cortex, which is that part of the brain. I always remember that women will say is the last point to develop in men, right? It's like, that men's brains don't develop until like 25. It's that part of the brain. The reality is it's humans. It's not just men, but none of our brains really are fully developed in that prefrontal cortex area. That is a newer, evolved part of our brain. It requires a lot of energy. Thinking and cognitive dissonance, it takes work. And our brains are also trying to be efficient. So it's trying to get to the quickest solution, not always the most rational or fact-based solution. That system is in competition with a primitive part of our brain that is focused on keeping us alive, right? It is effective from the minute we are born and we start opening our eyes. It's a threat detector, and it is hypersensitive and will view things as a threat that might not be a threat. When you look at the research, this is called a negativity bias, where we see a negative thing that could be harmful more conservatively. Like we would rather fail and this, rustling in the bushes, it might be a tiger. So we're going to not wait and find out. We're going to react. And that reaction usually takes the form of fight, flight, or freeze. And then there's like a fourth one that often gets added on, and appease. Sometimes we, try to look like a tiger, so that we don't get beaten, or we do whatever that the situation requires just to get through it. But when humans, we've evolved, society's evolved, those type of physical threats are not as prevalent as they were, right? Most of our needs are met. There's not people kind of trying to steal our resources. We can get from the corner store most everything we need, but our brains are really not that evolved yet. So we have to use this other part of our brain when we notice that, oh, there's a rustling in the bush, all these like alarms are going off, get the heck out of there. But part of us has to realize, okay, wait, it's just the wind, or it's just something that's not threatening. And that takes energy, and that's the education that I try to help people focus on. And human brains are predictably irrational, so there's forces at play that can easily manipulate emotions, right? It's like we try to look at emotions like they're this soft thing, but really those are the drivers of our behavior. Those are the motivating factors of what we do, what we want, and what we think we need. And if you're not well versed on that, and somebody else is, then you are a lot more likely to be manipulated or steered by those things. And we see that a lot with media and how divided we are getting, because people are like, yeah, no one has seen this problem, but you do. And not only did you see it, but you're saying the solution is to do this. And then it's like, yeah, that's the easiest one. I'm going to go with that. And then there's no motivation to really do that critical thinking. And so when you slow down, pause, understand those concepts, build a common language to these, it turns out there's a handful of areas that are very triggering to humans, right? Predictability, the framework that I use, the safety model. Security is that our brains need for predictability and certainty. We're always craving it. Another one is having agency or autonomy over our own choices. And that one's kind of tricky because it doesn't necessarily have to really be true, but as long as we feel like we have agency, like we feel better about it, right? And that's one that's pretty easily manipulated in like sales type conversations. I see it all the time. Fairness. If we see an interaction that doesn't look fair, that can just change, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, that's enough for me. And then you just either shut down or you gravitate, away from that. So our need to witness or engage in fairness is a huge one. Whether we think somebody is judging us, likes us or not, or thinks that there's a term othered. Like if you're the only other person and the only person like you in a room, you know what it feels like. And sometimes people will make assumptions, right? If you're the only woman, or you're the only gay person in a room, people just might assume, and that doesn't feel good. And that can get us into I got to shut down. I got to just freeze up on this one. Or I might be, how dare you think that? That esteem one is, and then trust is another one. And trust in the form of how easy it is to build rapport with someone, and how natural it is to have that rapport easily with people that look and remind us of ourselves, or people that we're close to. And this is the one that gets really manipulated these days, because when we see someone who's not like us, it's a natural reaction when you think of the types of brain to be like, oh, I don't trust you out of the gate. I'm going to be suspicious. And that's a thing that has allowed us to evolve and thrive, but it isn't as needed now, right? And that trust piece, there's an extra step. When we build empathy, when we start building that, like when we open our eyes as babies, we're looking at people that look like us, our parents, our family members. So when we see somebody later in life that looks like someone in our family, there's just this it's natural, but it's like unassuming, like, oh, I just naturally trust that person. I see greatness in them because they remind us of ourselves. There's an extra step when that person is different. And if it's the first time you met somebody like them, it's a lot of extra steps before you can not be in a threatened state when things go off. And all of these are working in concert with each other, and we have different levels of sensitivity to them at all, at all points at any interaction. So I know that was a really long answer, but to just sum it up, it would be, common language around understanding the brain basics, and then reflective practice on understanding how your brain operates in that milieu. Um, any questions for me on that? Sorry, I went so long, but
No, it was insightful. One, I loved the mnemonic. That was great, and you are spot on. And I couldn't, as you were teaching me, I was thinking I couldn't help but think all of the old, I'm thinking like 10 years ago, I've been, in management and leadership positions for a while. All the very old and early unconscious bias trainings, boring and not compelling. But hearing, if you would have taught me this side of my brain and then tied that in, I would have been like locked in to the topic, and maybe to give us some grace, we had to get through the boring stuff and be introduced to it before we can have people like you digging into the rabbit holes and making it
yeah.
meaningful. But I
And
love
science
it.
is progressing. Like there's
Yeah.
new, data, the neuroscience behind these things. We're able to see
Mhm.
what parts of the brain are firing off in these interactions. I'm glad that you think it's compelling. It's the backbone of the work that I do. The Academy of Brain-Based Learning uh, owns that model, and it has been, the linchpin of my individual coaching and the cultural work that I do. And then I guess I got to mention too, the Institute for Coaching Innovation just released a white paper where AI meets empathy. And it's talking about what you said is like, how do you leverage the best of both to get, to wherever we're going with this, and how critical it is to remain and good at and develop those human skills. Yeah, the mnemonic is great too. I guess they all fit. And then the why piece, I guess going back to that, is really just an acknowledgement that that's the general piece, right? And that your personality, your experience, your upbringing, um, anything that has happened to you can really like change how you react or how sensitive you are to each one of those domains. And so it's really just a reflection that, there's the general thing, but we're all unique and we all have something that's potentially valuable and, innovative if we can tap into it and we don't get afraid and have that other part of the brain holding it down.
Would you say is the why you or yet, or what does the why stand for?
You, yeah,
You.
it
Okay.
really is. Yeah. So it's like security, autonomy, fairness, esteem, and trust. And the last one is, you know, you, right?
You. What is your role in this? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great assessment that is really personally reflective. That it's a 50 question assessment, each of those domains, and when you get it back, you can then start to say, oh, change that security domain. I'm really sensitive to that, and then you're like, I wonder why, and then you can start, oh, that's because the first time something changed, it really was hard for me or our family, and until we process that, people don't realize that um, when you don't put light on something, it kind of just operates below the surface and kind of can be a suppression. Like if there's a thing and it's like a beach ball and you're standing in water and you're trying to hold it under there. Yeah, you can hide it, but it takes work. But when you like look at it, it's like deflating the beach ball. You understand, oh, part of my brain was feeling like this was the reality. I now have an opportunity to change that viewpoint, and then that can really change everything. It's like a lot of confidence building and imposterism is deflated in that way through just really unpacking like where are these kind of sensitivities to these domains coming from, and then just basic understanding of how emotions work and that you can regulate emotions. People just think emotions are somebody screaming and crying and I don't want to deal with it, but it's not that. It's really like there's a lot of agency over it, and you can there's a difference between expressing and suppressing emotion or processing things so that they then don't have that same level of weight. So when you look at that individual piece, there's like, to kind of go through on this, where would you start? It would be building that common language and understanding, giving personal reflective tools, and emphasizing that the autonomy is there. You need to do this work, and there's accountability to it, right? It's like I have a background in DEI, and sometimes people think that means that everybody should get everything that they want. all of the time, and that's just not the case. And it created challenges when people had conflict. The easiest solution is to say, oh, it's because I'm different. And that would then insulate them from any personal work and put the onus on somebody else. And in fact, it's usually somewhere in between. Now, I want to say that's in individual interactions. There, systemic racism, systemic biases into systems is a huge thing, and I don't want to pretend that that doesn't exist. These things get encoded into our systems, and they're worth a critical look. Now may not be the time because that work has been completely flipped in the terms that we were using to make things better for everyone and to really lean into a meritocracy are being twisted to mean something totally different. So I feel like that needs to kind of calm down and focus on the individualistic interactions. How are we part of a culture that we have accountability into forming at work? Did I answer your question?
You did and more. There's so much I want to pick up on, and I know our time is limited. One, I just want to echo something back to you that you said that I think is undervalued, or maybe there's not enough awareness around it. And it is, we have to be careful what we're letting our brain consume. It's like, what are we putting in our body? We think about that. What are we putting in our brain? It is so important to know. I won't keep us there. But I will say, as you were talking, I was just thinking where I would encourage you to keep digging, and I welcome if you've already started digging here, is I've been, managing in corporate America several years. I've learned a lot about DEI, how I feel about it, and what I've seen happen to it as an infrastructure has evolved. I bring a strong frame and I have strong convictions around, I don't need someone to create this DEI infrastructure. My purpose is to teach people how to strengthen their sense of agency, how to get their power back, how to take self-responsibility. And that's kind of the frame I hope to bring to my organization. But hearing you talk, I was thinking, I think you might have a special gift around teaching people the neuroscience that is behind DEI and what is happening. We're all humans. We are intrinsically wired to care for others. We're a herd animal. We're wired for connection. So I would encourage you, one, if you're already digging there, I would be curious what you're finding, but also how are you feeling about the evolution of DEI and how you hope to like rebuild or rebrand it?
Well, the evolution of DEI, I don't know that I would call it an evolution. I mean, here we are, but it's almost like a de-evolution or
Revolution?
yeah,
Yeah.
revolution, I guess. And not all of it is based in, I think, the same reality or the same frame of reference. And when you have these two different frames of reference, it's really hard to connect when you can't agree on some basic truths, right? So when we look at DEI holistically, it had a lot of very distinct elements. One of them was attracting talent. And so people, companies wanted to appear to be welcoming to those with different thought, different experiences in the name of innovation, right? Like we need the best and the brightest. If we're a homogenous organization, then we don't even know what we're not knowing, right? And it's like, let's bring in ideas. So that's one element of DEI that we had. Once folks are in there, then there's the how do we interact on a more equitable way? Because if I get into an environment and I'm the only person like me and no one's really seeing that, or I don't have the confidence or I don't feel safe enough to present an idea that is counter to the way that things have always been done, doesn't matter that I have an element of diversity and a different thought because you're never going to get to it if you don't have that psychological safety to challenge the status quo or to make a mistake in the effort of progress or innovation, right? It's like all of that gets that held down. And then we are culturally, especially in the US, we're like oriented with guilt and innocence, right and wrong, and we codify everything. So human resources, which, is necessary, but it's like inhumane on so many levels. And it is reduced to just right or wrong when there's so much nuance and there's so much importance to context and background. And it is, I think, at odds with progress in this area. So even before this kind of revolution, evolution, or current state of DEI, in my work, I noticed that there was a gap in the work, right? It was uh, we didn't equip people with the tools to handle the amount of emotional labor involved in this work. Um, so when you are going through your day to day and you operate with, I'm a good person, I'm doing the right thing, let's get to work. And then you get feedback and you haven't seen that feedback. And maybe that feedback is your words, your actions. Like maybe you always pick somebody that's like, the person who's always been your rainmaker to do something. And you don't realize that there's some people potentially even more skilled that just never are getting that opportunity. Maybe use some outdated language and you don't realize that that could be hurtful. And when somebody gives you that feedback, so you're sitting here with this view of yourself, I'm good. And then, oh my gosh, I've caused harm. That's an incredible amount of cognitive work, emotional work. And no one ever addresses that piece of it. They think that, oh, if you go to this bias class or if you are presented with this, truth, that it'll just fix itself. And it doesn't. So in my work and what I try to bring is let's like take steps back. Let's remove the diversity elements and just talk about the human element and the brain element, right? First, let's get them understanding, and then we can have healthy conversations around how these things show up. Or if I'm somebody who really, really needs things to be predictable and certain, and I'm working with somebody who just loves the mystery of like breaking things and just seeing what happens, there's going to be conflict. So maybe we can get ahead of that and say, when we're working together, maybe we can play off of each other instead of it feeling like an impassable conflict and wall to address. But it's fascinating stuff to me. There's a lot of great neuroscience and metrics in the work that I mentioned, with the safety assessment and this kind of psychological safety assessment that you can use over time to just see how teams are feeling. And another big piece that I didn't mention is the ability to, in short chunks, practice over time. We had this assumption that like we take a class on bias and everybody does it. And as an organization, we say, look, we did bias training, but it doesn't mean anything if you can't put it into practice. And one of the most impactful ways we learn is through getting it wrong and realizing it. And when that error is painful because we're like, oh my gosh, I might have caused harm, that pain actually makes the learning stick more because you're like, I don't want to do that again. I'm going to do what it takes. I have motivation to get this right. So there's no escaping that type of feeling, but we never make room for that at work. And I'm trying to do that on an individual basis, team and culture basis with this work. But yeah, it is a challenge. So I don't know that I would change anything. I would supplement that. But I do think DEI deserves a critical eye, but not the way that it's happening in our culture right now, because there's nothing civil and there's nothing that at least says, let's start here, right? Uh, yeah, and it's designed to get us angry because when we are angry, we're predictable on how we're going to act. And when we're predictable, then we can be controlled. And it's just like, man, know your brain. So you're not being manipulated, you're not being led along, you're not being controlled.
Right. Well, I love how you're thinking about it. And I love your frame of the rebrand of human plus brain. And I will say, one, I have like an iota of the education that you do, but we're like moving towards the same better outcome, which I think when you mentioned, what did I learn from all this talk about diversity? I have a new appreciation for diversity of thought. I love people whose brains work different from mine. It sharpens my thinking. I love when you challenge my belief system and broaden my view. I don't know that everybody loves that, but I love to be sharper because of it. And then on the equity part, I think we all just want a bit of fairness, right? And to be and to see some consistency. I think that's important. Consistent behavior is important.
Yep.
And then on that inclusion piece, it's like we all have the universal experience of feeling left out. Let's be kind. Let's be considerate. That's all I'm asking for. And that's kind of my frame of DEI. As I mentioned, you have a lot, you're doing all the hard, gritty work, but I appreciate that. I believe we're moving in the same direction.
Absolutely. And kindness and it's such an important part of it, but it isn't as easy as just being kind, right? Because
Right.
what my frame of reference for kindness, it may be really off the mark for someone else.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to, with that intent, with that, we heard a lot of give grace or just try to build that understanding. And there's a piece of this work is when you notice that emotional trigger has happened into a threat state, there's some very science-based things that you can practice alone or together that help get to a regulated spot, because that's what you need. Your dysregulation is in that threat spot, and to get regulated, not threatened, that's when the real innovation, the real connection, the real bouncing of ideas happens. And if we can get everyone there, we can create a space where, oh, if you do a misstep, I can tell you about it, and we can like work it out. And then you've learned, and I now have more trust for you, and boom, here we are. But it just seems harder and harder to do that.
Right. You
Chris,
did. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
One quick thing. You mentioned, and I'm going to hit you with the last closing question so we can give something to your listeners. One, I just want to highlight how you mentioned HR. One, they're drowning. Let's start there. And they've been given this model of everything is right or wrong, yes or no. No. There's this great book called The Systems Leader. It's by Robert Siegel. He talks about these 5 cross pressures, one of which, well, first he frames it as decisions today are 51-49. We are operating in gray area. It is so hard. But one of these cross pressures is strength and empathy. We have to balance both. We can't just be dictators holding people accountable for everything. No, we have humans in the workplace. They have lives, they have family members, illnesses, etc. And so we got to balance both. We can't just lean into one or the other. So that came to mind. But I would ask you, if we were to leave something for your audience today, you talked about a lot. What is the best tip that you could give to someone who's in a leadership position? You mentioned all this stuff about DEI or neuroscience, the weight of carrying emotions and learning about it and how valuable it is. What is one tip you would give to the leader of today just to get started and put them in the right direction of being more effective when it comes to anything we talked about today, DEI or your safety mnemonic?
Yeah, the thing I would leave people with is something that I just finished a book. It was written by a hostage negotiator. And as I was reading it, I realized, oh my gosh, he's like talking about all of these same skills, but in a really, really high stakes environment. And at one point, he's instructing people how to understand the person that they're negotiating with. And it's deeper than just understand. There's like types of operating that people like have. And he said the worst mistake, and I think this is true on so many levels, is to operate under the assumption that your view is the normal view, right? There is no normal. And you should be asking questions to understand where other people are coming from a general curiosity, try to withhold judgment and question and not manipulate into your frame of reference, but to really open and try to understand someone else. And that's easy to say, hard to do, but there's way to learn that and practice that over time. So I would say that don't make the assumption that your view is normal and or right.
Wow, that is great. It reminds me of a simple one-liner: choose curiosity over judgment because they can't coexist. So
Mm.
you're in one or you're in the other. Curiosity is the path. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I love it. Chris, you got me talking way more than I normally do on a podcast. Thank you so much. We have gone a little bit over time. Thank you so much for your time, your curiosity about the work that I do. I feel like this has been a great conversation. Thanks for making time for it.
Likewise, thank you for having me.